Hello, this is my first keynote I've ever done, probably the last. Quite a worrying moment for all of us. Basically, I've got 4 things that I was asked to talk about, and I'll try. If I overrun, you're just going to go and just tell me to shut up, so that's fine. First is, I do a lot of comedy shows about science, and there's the question of, can stand-up comedy, is it a way of engaging with big ideas, and sometimes very serious ideas? And George Carlin, who some of you may know, George Carlin, a wonderful, very angry American comic. Parents here may well also know him as the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine in America. But he was a wonderful comic, very much in the style of Lenny Bruce. And he once said that stand-up is a low art, but it's a very potent art. And I think that's really what I've found, where some of you may have seen people like Josie Long or Chris Addison or Stuart Lee, and all of those people deal with big ideas, but we kind of con the audience initially by them thinking, it's all right, it's just going to be a laugh, and then you get into talking about quantum chronodynamics. Actually, you don't. It's a really tricky subject to get a laugh out of. Any of you have ever wondered, quantum chronodynamics, that is the hardest one, because basically if you can get a joke about quantum chronodynamics, you've probably already made up that joke already. So that's one of the difficult things is, when I do science shows, if there are too many scientists in, I know it will be problematic. The first problem with doing any comedy about science is you have to start off with a kind of preamble. Like if I mentioned mitochondrial Eve, I once talked about mitochondrial Eve on stage, and I was explaining the idea, and you have to be, of course there's much debate about this in science, and many scientists actually disagree with the idea, but there are some people who do, and you have to give this kind of like 5-minute disclaimer and go, and now the joke. And the mitochondrial Eve was an intro. I was talking about out of Africa theory first of all, and then got into mitochondrial Eve and the idea that all of us, every single person alive today, comes from one woman 100,000 years ago. I said every single person alive comes from one woman, and this man at the back just shouted out, "She sounds like quite a slag," which I think was misunderstanding the idea to some extent. So that's always interested me first. And by the way, just why I mention this is something I've only found out 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, I wanted to talk about the broadness of the audience for people about science. I talked about mitochondrial Eve in Exeter on Sunday, and I've just received a message from the guy who is in charge of the editorialising of the English Defence League, who thoroughly enjoyed the show, but disliked my mention of mitochondrial Eve because he believed that I suggested the English Defence League were racist. So if you're ever wondering how broad the audience is, because I genuinely, I've received this 10 minutes ago. I checked my emails, I went, I'd never thought that I was one of those science comics that was popular with the English Defence League. It's a really strange moment for me. I probably shouldn't have shared that with you. I also, there's a lot of other people who come to my shows as well. It wasn't a corporate, by the way, for the English Defence League. I'd like to make that clear as well. This is one of the things that I find interesting as well, is that you do get misconstrued a lot. I've had, the first joke I ever did about science was actually about 8 years ago. I started doing shows which had some science in them. And the first stuff that I talked about was very obvious stuff. It was things like iridology and homeopathy and psychics. So I got in kind of the back route, which is to talk about ridiculous things, what happens when we throw out logic and rationalism from the window. And then I started to try and deal with bigger ideas. The first joke I ever wrote specifically about science was, I apologise for this, it's not a particularly good joke. The other day, I bought my son a book. It was Dr. Seuss's Schrodinger's Cat in the Hat. It was rubbish. It took ages to open the book, and when eventually I got it open, it turned out it was just loads of pictures of a dead cat. And unfortunately, I told that joke at an event with a lot of producers from Horizon in, who again came up to me and went, "You haven't really understood the idea. That's logically flawed." And then I explained that sometimes comedy has to deal with actually taking logic and then it becomes flawed, and that's the way that a joke works. And they said it wasn't really good enough. So that's a problem as well that you can have. I did a gig in Bristol, the first big science tour I did. I tried to deal with everything in the universe, but it turns out there's loads. And I right near the end, 2 hours I'd been talking, one person just shouted out, they went, "Drosophila." I went, "What?" They went, "Drosophila." I said, "Sorry, what?" They went, "Drosophila, the fruit fly. You've done nothing about them." And I thought I came back with a pretty good immediate comeback. I said the reason I don't know any material about the fruit fly is they're used for experimentation due to the rapid nature of their mutations. Therefore, any observation I make about the fruit fly on a Sunday is irrelevant by Thursday. And it got nothing. And I said, and that's another reason I don't do anything about fruit flies. So it's been an interesting journey to find out what kind of audiences you get with science comedy. And I have found that it's broader and broader. This is one of the most interesting things, is when I play to an audience, there are quite often, what I love is children who have to turn up with a letter from their mum and dad, which I find is absolutely charming, because it's meant to be kind of over 16 to go, oh, mum and dad allow me in, and also get people who are in their 80s and their 90s coming to these shows. And a bit like you were saying, Kathy, you think the public are a lot more excited than sometimes we imagine, that sometimes, I think in fact the media is greatly at fault very often. We have a lot of journalists who write in a very negative manner about science, and also, as was mentioned, unfortunately a lot of science journalists are never allowed to write the interesting story. They go, can you write that story about red wine and chocolate? And they go, well, not really. This is a really interesting story about, basically a double pulsar, which means that we could possibly, work out some of the ideas about the theory of relativity. Oh, no, I don't think people are interested in that. They want to know about whether this week red wine is good for them or not. And I think that's what I found going out and about and playing across, not merely the UK, but also going into Europe as well and the United States, is there's a lot of people out there who at the moment don't feel that they're getting the scientific information necessarily from the media, though that is changing. And this is something I do a show called The Infinite Monkey Cage, as you mentioned, with Brian Cox, the sexy face of particle physics. And that's the phrase that isn't used as much as they'd imagined. And it's been very interesting with the kind of audience that listen to us. First of all, it's not a very, what might be called a Radio 4 audience. Radio 4 supposedly has an audience entirely made up, I think it's of a 58-year-old woman who is doing the washing up in Suffolk. I think that's what it's meant to be, the Radio 4. That's it. If you live in Suffolk and you have a sink and some dirty crockery between 4 and 6, you're the core audience of Radio 4. What we found is that we have a lot of children listening, a lot of parents, and a lot of children and parents listening together. Which is a great thing. And when we do live events, it's an incredible, broad range of people that we have. One of my favourite moments was a live event about a year and a half ago at the Edinburgh Science Festival, where there were a lot of children in the audience, but it was about 600 people, and mainly the adults are getting, asking questions. A lot of adults are going, wanting to know about the double pulsar, there was a wonderful moment where one man asked from the back, he said, is it true it would be possible to pass through a black hole if I was wearing a lead life belt? It was such a wonderful way he asked it, because it really sounded like he had actually invented a lead life belt. That's what he'd spent his whole life working on. And if the answer was no, he had wasted his existence, right? So we were getting all these questions. Can we ever see the edge of the universe? Will that ever be possible? And then we realized the children hadn't really had a chance. And so we got to the point of going, oh, sorry, we've missed you down there, and you look like you've got questions. And this little boy said, yes, I've got a question. He was about 10 years old. And everyone suddenly got very excited by the fact it was going to be a child's question. One of those charming things that children ask about, Jupiter or rainbows. It was going to be something like that, or whether there are Martians. Something. It was going to be really sweet, and everyone's kind of turning around to wait for the charming Hollywood moment that a 10-year-old asks a question about science. And we said, yes, what's your question? And he just put his hand up and he said, yes, I was wondering this. Is dark energy merely a fiction created by scientists to cover up for an area of knowledge which will never be understood? And Brian went, we're still very unsure about that, let's take the next question, which was probably the right thing to do. And so I think we have seen, first, there are a lot of the cliches which aren't true about science, another one which I do want to mention is we're often told about the fact that we do get a lot of people complaining. I mean, that's fair to say. I think, unfortunately, due to the nature of trolls on the internet, if you look at the internet too long, you presume everyone is insane. You presume that the internet is basically, it's the modern equivalent of Bedlam. It's where you go to see people shaking, wrapped in blankets, screaming about how polar bears are bigger than ever. In fact, polar bears have never been as big, so how can there be any kind of climate change? And you get these very bizarre things. We once mentioned creationism very briefly on Infinite Monkey Cage and got a furious complaint from someone saying, by attacking creationism, you are making fun of all Christians. And we went back and went, we're not. Not all of them are mad. It's actually quite a small group, and I think that's an important thing to remember, is there's kind of an illusion that's been created that there's this furious battle between religion and science, and there's not. It's only on television, generally BBC One, 10 till 11 in the morning, presented by Nikki Campbell. They will place on television the most insane kind of errant preacher that you can imagine. It's got a kind of Cape Fear image of a preacher, screaming at Peter Atkins. And that doesn't exist. This is what we found, is a lot of the, I mean, we do get a lot of complaints, as I said. We've had, the first complaints we got were 2 months before the first show was recorded. 2 months before the first show was recorded, some people started complaining about it, which is very prescient of them. I was very impressed by it. Before we knew what was in the show, they were very angry about what was in the show. And the main, we used to get, because of the title, The Infinite Monkey Cage, it's called The Infinite Monkey Cage because Radio 4 had suggested Top Geek. So that's why it's called Infinite Monkey Cage, because we felt Top Geek was not really the kind of image where, you know, men in tight jeans round a particle accelerator, just kind of, look how fast that one's gone. You know, we didn't really want that one. You know, look, Jimmy Carr's just shown us a Higgs boson. You know, that was, we didn't really want that. So we called it Infinite Monkey Cage, and we got, the first complaint was just a furious one, which was complaining about, they said, Infinite Monkey Cage, well done, Radio 4. Right, and they didn't mean well done. It's a very sarcastic font. Said, well done, Radio 4, yet again you celebrate vivisection. Right, I don't know how many people here listen to Radio 4 and have noticed the enormous undercurrent of vivisection on Radio 4, but maybe it's on the Today programme. I don't listen to the first hour of the Today programme. Maybe that's when John Humphreys is, in a moment, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but first I'm taking this dog's eyes out with a spoon. Maybe that's when that bit's on. But so we used to be able to write back to people, and we wrote back to someone. We said, just so if you are worried about the idea of the monkey cage, an infinite monkey cage is roomy, and we were then told off because we got a second complaint saying that we'd appeared to be facetious. And again, important, I think, about the religious side is that very few of our complaints are about that. We've dealt with a lot of things. We've had a lot of quite a broad number of guests on as well, who are from many different backgrounds. One of my favourite complaints actually was from a site called The Darwin Deception. The Darwin Deception, which we weren't really expecting a glowing review from. But Darwin Deception complaint said, this smug show that believes anything can be proved by facts and evidence. Which I presumed it had been script written by Barry Cryer when I read that. And then said, anything we prove by facts, so everything about it is wrong. Even the title, The Infinite Monkey Cage, refers to a Darwinian myth that an infinite number of monkeys would eventually write the works of Shakespeare. Right. This is rubbish, as a recent experiment has proved. This was the experiment, which I even think Darwin Deception actually slightly misreported. They said they gave 12 monkeys in Paynton Zoo a typewriter. After a week, all they had done was poo and wee in it. Therefore, the idea is rubbish. And we kind of wrote back to them, and we went, the thing with the Infinite Monkey Cage thing is it does really have to be as many things as there are on the ingredients. It really is infinite or nothing. And they wrote back and they said, oh, well, but what if it was 100? Would we start to see a pattern there? And we went back and said, no, it really has to be an infinite number of monkeys, which are very hard to get together for health and safety reasons, right? It really has to be that number of monkeys. And it was quite interesting. This is one of the things that I found in trying to communicate any ideas about science, is that there is a dogmatism with people. There are people sometimes trying to work out who you should argue with is very, very difficult. And these people, we kept trying to explain infinite. It's an idea about the idea of infinity, and it's not an incremental thing. It doesn't go 12 monkeys. Okay, it's not a Shakespeare, but maybe it's kind of, I don't know, a leaflet about footpath use in Dorset, and 50 monkeys. It's a funny story sent into the Reader's Digest. 100 monkeys. It's a Dan Brown. It just kind of builds and builds. If monkeys that hate the Vatican, and. This is all the way along. Every now and again, you have wonderful moments of communication. Some people, I find after my shows, frequently people come up to me and go, do you know you're entirely wrong about the strong anthropic principle? And I was, no, actually, I'm all right on that. It's more likely to be something about quantum mechanics. And so it's very interesting. There is a dialogue. There are lots of people there who want to kind of chip in. And then there are other people where, for instance, when we get to the extremists, when we get to the intelligent design people, when we get to the creationists, sometimes it really isn't worth the debate. Because if someone still says to you, well, explain the eye then, you think, you know what, there's a lot of books out there. You really, if this is what's worrying you, just go to any bookshop. You'll find at least 6 or 7 books there which will give you some idea about the evolution of the eye. If you're still going, you can't explain that. Oh no, we can. Here, look, here's a series of diagrams. Each level there, the possibility of it being an advantage. Well, that only explains it through diagrams and facts, yet again. And this is... And I've tried to explain to people, I said, sometimes don't actually answer with real... If you have someone going, explain the eye, and all that, if someone says to you, for instance, if we come from apes, how can there still be apes? Don't give them the true answer. It's a waste of your time. It's not as much fun. right? If you just kind of go, oh, well, you know, because obviously we don't actually come from chimpanzees, we share a common ancestor, there's a branching off. Boring, don't do that. Think of the best answer you can think of. Think of the most fun you can have. How can there still be apes if we come from apes? Don't you know? Well, what else would ride the tricycles in an Eastern European circus, do you see? And you've had more fun with it. And got us far in terms of persuading someone. Now, what else have I got to talk about? Sorry, I've suddenly realised there's balance. Balance is very interesting, by the way, because that's something that we do have quite a lot on Infinite Mind Caterers, questions about balance. And I think the important thing to remember is I think it's very, you know, certainly within kind of liberal communities, we always get very worried about giving everyone their chance to speak. And sometimes just because you believe the opposite doesn't mean you're as right. And I think, unfortunately, again, the internet has kind of made people believe, well, my opinion has appeared in bold, in caps lock, under someone's article, therefore I have as much right to have some kind of view on this. You have the right to have that view, but don't share it as much, please. Yeah, this is the moment where I kind of move into fascism to some extent. But it is, I found that there is a point, again, I did a documentary once about evolution, and they said, you know, we need to have someone on for the creationist community, and I said, but we don't, it's a science documentary, and I said, we can have them on as long as we can do this. Well, that's Professor Steve Jones, but now here's someone who's wrong. But it turns out you're not allowed to do that, apparently. The other things that I was meant to mention, what were the other things? What were the other subjects? Oh, now this is an interesting thing. Do environmentalists take... I was also going to mention, by the way, Greenbelt, which is... Because, again, the Greenbelt Christian Festival was one of the most amazing, because I'm a militant atheist, according to the Telegraph. So I'm really militant. If anyone came up to me and went, oh, so you don't believe in a God, I would turn to them and go, oh, no. So I'm pretty, you know... In fact, I get so busy just having chats with people, I often forget to bomb a church. But... that's another thing that have the labels. Everyone, it's so easy, you know. This is the environmentalist thing. Is I think we're always, oh, the po-faced environmentalists, right? Now, there are, obviously, in every movement, there are people who are dogmatic. And there can be, within the fringes of the environmental movement, and sometimes even within mainstream groups, there are people who are overly dogmatic, and just as people can be misinformed by climate change skeptics and climate change deniers, so people can be misinformed on many different other sides as well. But I actually don't feel that it's just the environmentalists who, oh, they're po-faced. We live in a time now where everything is just meant to be banal. It's just a laugh, innit? Don't matter. Right? And if anyone takes anything seriously, it's a bit embarrassing. Oh, calm down, mate. You're taking that a bit seriously, aren't you? You're taking the end of human civilization a bit seriously. And what's interesting is the other side, by the way, and I don't want to say, but if you think that there's just a bunch of kind of really happy-go-lucky corporations who are just, we're having a laugh. We're having a laugh just doing all this stuff. Then all these po-faced environment. No, they don't. If you have ever made a joke about a climate change denier on stage, it's very interesting how quickly they suggest legal action, as I found out when I made a joke about someone at a gig for libel reform. That's entirely true. So I think there's nothing... Sometimes we get worried about being overly serious about certain things. Sometimes things can be taken seriously, and we have to remember that it's not just... There isn't just one side being kind of sometimes overly po-faced. And I think it's very difficult to get information across in a bite-sized world that we live in, where everything has to be very, very immediate. If you can place it in 140 characters, that is a very important thing to do nowadays. You know, anything longer than that, and you're drifting off a little bit. Oh, Facebook, it's just words, isn't it? That's MySpace. I don't even know where that is. That's the Brigadoon of the internet. But it's that kind of idea. I think, yes, both sides need... Well, I think this is... in the environmental thing, I think the problem is people have created just this... You're either with us or against us. And that can happen on both sides. We're trying to have a debate with two of one's a climate change denier, one's a climate change skeptic who constantly writes quite misinformed things about me on his blog. And trying to just go, it doesn't have to be... You are only allowed to believe, again, it's the dogmatism thing there. Oh, this is what, if I believe in this, I have to believe in this, I have to believe in this. There is no room, I must never have a conversation or publicise anything which may well suggest anything which has any kind of chink in my armour. And I think that's the biggest problem, where if we've got sometimes two sides which can be quite po-faced, and again, the media never really want, certainly television. If you see debate shows, they don't want this. Oh, that's an interesting point there, the Archbishop of York. Oh, yeah, thanks very much, Richard Dawkins. Yeah, that's really good, yeah. It's interesting, because there's a lot of common ground. They don't want that. That's the last thing they want. They want, oh, I can't believe it. Richard Dawkins started mooning Rowan Williams, you know. And then Rowan Williams started throwing ornamental candles at him. It was absolutely brilliant. Lucky Nicky Campbell had a fire extinguisher. So it's, I don't know what I'm talking about now. So anyway, dogma, bad. Infinity, big. Actually, the final thing, I forgot to mention, so has communication changed? Has science communicated? And I think there's two things that have. I think it's fantastic that I think this year there were more teenagers applying to do physics than ever before, as far as I know, which, at university level, which is fantastic. And I do think that we are living in a time where there are a lot of people very intrigued by ideas. And I think, one, many scientists have learned to communicate better, but I think the other thing is sometimes scientists beat themselves up too much about going, oh, we've really got to get out there and communicate. I think sometimes the other side, people like me, kind of from an arts background, people who are not from a science background, have to spend a little bit more time being interested. It's not all just down to scientists continually going out there and having to do fun things. Look, I'm bursting a balloon to make a point. Look, here's some fireworks. I'm showing you a thing. It's fun, fun, fun. In fact, Dara O'Brien has had a go at me. He said, sometimes you make science look too much fun. Imagine you'll attract people to doing it as a job. Oh, they'll be bored, some of them. And that's... But I think in communication we have at the moment some fantastic communicators in science, and I know this is one thing that I always tell audiences. I say, when you're reading a book, if you're someone from who mainly reads novels, the first science book you read it like a novel. You go, there we go, that's that done. I didn't understand any of it, and you have to do things slowly. And I think that's what we have to do as non-scientists, is realise that things take time. To understand things, it takes time, and it is worth the effort. And I think many people out there at the moment really are drawing people in and realising that things like the heat death of the universe are fun for a Sunday, as we've discovered with Wonders of the Universe. What an amazing... That to me is something that a lot of critics have had a go at that. And I just think, isn't that great? They're going, they've dumbed down science. As usual, 9 o'clock on a Sunday, someone talking about entropy. Using John Nettles to illustrate it. Anyway, so that's. I think communication is improving. I think it's up to those who are not scientists also to move a little bit more towards it. Fortunately, the internet allows us to realise that many people are insane, but do realise that the percentage is not as much as you might imagine. So there we go. There's my key points.